All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to today's Explainer. So, if you've been keeping tabs on the recent municipal elections in LA, you've probably heard about this incredibly polarizing and honestly kind of chaotic broadcast. The speaker basically declared that it is absolute 0 hour for Los Angeles. And I mean, they're making these explosive claims that the entire system is rigged, specifically targeting the mayoral and city council races, and they're painting this deeply apocalyptic picture of the city. But here's the thing we want to look at. Beneath all that raw, unfiltered anger, is there actually a calculated blueprint at work? Today, we're going to objectively deconstruct this whole broadcast. We want to separate the intense, very visceral emotion from the actual underlying strategy, because we really want to understand how this brand of modern, internet-driven political warfare actually operates.
To really wrap our heads around this stream of consciousness delivery, we've broken it down into 5 key buckets. 1. Allegations of stolen elections. 2. Framing LA's urban crisis. 3. The calculated political strategy. 4. Escalation and extreme proposals. And finally, 5. The multi-point master plan.
Kicking things off with Section 1, Allegations of Stolen Elections.
So, the entire foundation of the speaker's grievance is built on this core assertion that the local political machine actively rigged the results against candidate Spencer Pratt. And they use this very specific mathematical claim to hook the audience. They state that candidate Nithya Raymond received votes over Karen Bass by a massive 2-to-1 ratio during late voting. And this ratio isn't just brought up as some weird anomaly, right? They're pointing to it as definitive, undeniable proof of a stolen election. By throwing out specific numbers like this, the broadcast is really trying to anchor his highly emotional claims in this veneer of statistical impossibility. It's basically telling the audience, hey, look at the numbers, there's no way this is legitimate.
And that actually perfectly illustrates how this whole case is built. It's just a rapid-fire stacking of allegations, because they don't just stop at the voting ratios. The broadcast quickly piles on claims of a 40% pullout of a 6-ballot dump. Then they accuse the opposition of paying homeless individuals to register to vote. They even bring up alleged hospice fraud, and they top the whole thing off by claiming Spencer Pratt voters received systemic rejection letters in the mail. The strategy here is pretty clear. Overwhelming force. By listing so many different vectors of alleged fraud right in a row, they're creating this narrative of systemic, inescapable corruption that completely validates the audience's deepest suspicions.
Moving on to Section 2, Framing LA's Urban Crisis.
Okay, so once the election is firmly framed as stolen, the focus of the broadcast pivots hard to the physical and economic fallout of that alleged theft. And the speaker uses some incredibly bleak, visceral imagery here. At one point, they flatly state, "This is Somalia, this isn't LA, just a shithole." They also refer to the current leadership as corrupt communists who are driving the city straight off a cliff. Now, we're looking at this quote to neutrally demonstrate the sheer emotional weight being thrown at the audience. Like, there is zero middle ground here. It's a rhetorical technique specifically designed to invoke maximum outrage and fear. They're not portraying Los Angeles as a city with, manageable problems. They're framing it as a totally collapsed state.
To back up that extreme rhetoric, the speaker stacks up a massive list of civic failures. They claim that major developers, hoteliers, and business owners are sending private text messages basically saying, "We're packing up and getting out of town." And this, they argue, triggers a total death spiral. Shuttering businesses mean decreased tax revenue, which means cut services. So they're painting a picture of a future with way more potholes, fewer firefighters, reduced police patrols, and a city just entirely consumed by weeds, graffiti, and garbage. It's this heavy accumulation of catastrophic failures, and it's meant to make the viewer feel like they are completely surrounded by decay.
Now, up to this point, if you were just casually listening, you'd probably assume this is simply an unhinged internet rant, right? But that actually brings us to a really pivotal question for this explainer. Is this really just raw anger, or is there a deeply calculated strategy operating behind the scenes here?
Which brings us to Section 3, the calculated political strategy.
This is where the broadcast takes a really fascinating turn, because it reveals a highly self-aware, tactical mindset that completely contradicts the chaotic anger we were just looking at. On the one hand, we've got the public-facing persona shouting, "It's war, it's 0 hour for Los Angeles." Very incendiary, totally emotionally driven. But then, on the other hand, in that exact same broadcast, there is a behind-the-scenes admission where they say, "I made a logical, reasonable decision." It's a striking duality, and it shows that the whole internet persona is recognized purely as a tool. The outrage is the engine, sure, but cold, calculating logic is actually what's sitting at the steering wheel. So let's look at how that logic is actually applied. The speaker admits they had the opportunity to sit down and do an interview with candidate Spencer Pratt. Now, normally, a loud political commentator would absolutely jump at the chance to platform their preferred candidate, right? I mean, if only for the clicks. But they didn't.
They intentionally declined the interview. Why? Because of a self-recognized complexity. The speaker was aware of their own controversial past statements, and they made a calculated decision that introducing their more radical audience to Pratt's campaign might actually hurt his chances of winning rather than help. They chose strategic silence over immediate content creation. Pretty interesting, right?
And that approach is summed up perfectly with this quote right here. I only think about how can I achieve this goal in the most successful way possible. That's it. Ego is seemingly just removed entirely from the equation. The motivation isn't about getting credit. It's strictly about forcing a specific political outcome. Honestly, it's a pretty Machiavellian admission, and it tells us that we really shouldn't mistake a loud, abrasive internet presence for a lack of strategic discipline.
All right, Section 4. Escalation and extreme proposals.
Because the local elections didn't go their way, the speaker declares that the era of playing it somewhat safe is completely over. And they establish this with an absolutely unyielding posture, stating, quote, if you want to stop me, you're going to have to fucking kill me. Now again, we're presenting this quote neutrally just to show the absolute uncompromising stance being adopted here. This isn't about finding some bipartisan solution or compromising down at City Hall. No, this is a declaration of total, uncompromising political warfare against their opponents. And they outline some very specific, highly aggressive tactics for this so-called war. First up, there are claims of possessing secret audio recordings of political opponents' employees, and they say this audio is so damaging it will force immediate, disgraceful resignations. Second, they actively weaponize the fear of federal law enforcement, literally telling opponents they should be lying awake at night sweating over 5 a.m. FBI door-busting raids. And finally, they announce an end to what they call vague maxing. Basically, that means no more speaking in internet code, no more dancing around their intentions, the gloves are completely off.
And perhaps absolutely nothing exemplifies the extreme nature of these proposals more than this number right here, 50 million. When asked what should be done about the broader demographic issues they perceive in the city, the broadcast states that a minimum of 50 million people need to be deported, labeling these individuals as fraudulent foreigners. Now, by throwing out a number of that magnitude, which is essentially a massive chunk of the entire U.S. population, the broadcast is firmly anchoring itself at the absolute farthest edge of the political spectrum. They are using sheer scale to try and shock the audience.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the multi-point master plan.
So how is all of this, the anger, the controversy, the aggressive strategy, how is it all channeled into an actual roadmap? Well, what's really fascinating here is that despite the frantic, zero-hour urgency of the rhetoric we've heard, the actual timeline they lay out is incredibly patient. The audience is explicitly told that change does not happen instantly overnight. Instead, patience is preached. The speaker explains that the strategy requires methodically working through individual steps over time. Expectations are set that achieving the ultimate goal for Los Angeles is going to take years, effectively transforming what was just a momentary electoral defeat into a long-term sustained campaign. And here is the exact procedure they outline. The whole effort kicks off with the mayoral campaign acting as step one, exposing what they view as the corrupt political machine. And what's interesting is, even in losing, they claim this step was a success because it pulled back the curtain. That paves the way for step two, which relies on implementing a multi-point plan over the coming years, utilizing those super aggressive tactics we just talked about, like the secret recordings and the relentless pressure. Ultimately, it all builds towards step three, which is cryptically referred to as Saving LA Phase 2. And the goal here is to elevate all this local anger into a massive national movement of like-minded individuals. Which leaves us with this final thought. We've seen how a broadcast can simultaneously project this unhinged apocalyptic anger while actually operating with a cold, calculated, multi-year strategy. So you have to ask, will this specific brand of hyper-aggressive, internet-driven political commentary, where extreme rhetoric is carefully deployed as a tactical weapon, will it redefine the future of local elections? It's a method that completely bypasses traditional media, rejects any sort of compromise, and builds fiercely loyal followings. Whether it ultimately succeeds in its goals or just completely burns out, it is absolutely a phenomenon that anyone interested in modern politics simply cannot ignore. Thanks for joining me on today's Explainer, and remember to keep questioning what's really driving the rhetoric you see online.